So first of all, what is the mission of the Swiss National Science Foundation? The Swiss National Science Foundation was established in 1952, and it's specifically, it has been established as a private, or I should say private foundation. The reason for that is that this type of organization will be totally independent from the government. So the main activity we're doing at the Swiss National Science Foundation, evaluating projects that will be done in an independent way. And that's very important to us. That's something that we should keep, and you should keep in mind. We're independent. Even though we are mandated by the federal government to support principally basic research in all disciplines. So our mission is to it's not only to support scientific research, like I said, in all disciplines, it's also to invest in young researchers. And I hope, and I see there are 30 young researchers here, and that's perfect, to enable research stays abroad, and to promote international cooperation, and to promote gender equality. Those are the key steps in our missions. And in order to do that, we translate what I call the values. We also have values here at the Swiss National Science Foundation. The quality is one. The independence, I already mentioned that, that's very important. The independence, the responsibility in what we do, and then fairness. And if we translate that, then it means that we have commitment to you. And those commitments are here. Like I already mentioned, we fund projects in all disciplines that goes from history to engineering science, medicine, biology, all disciplines. Our evaluation procedure is competitive, and that's also very important. I will come back later on that. Transparent, and also partial, and that's also very important. The quality, that's the key word, the central criterion of the research, and that's also the case in our evaluation procedure. The researchers from all over the world review proposals based on international standard. That's also very important. We also enhance that independency, but also improve and enlarge all the contribution of the research and science in Switzerland and abroad. We are dedicated in particular to promoting young researchers, that I already mentioned, and gender equality, and that's also fairness. Other commitments we have to you, and that's what I mentioned on the value responsibility. Here we have clear, straightforward procedure, and that's very important. You have to be informed about what we do. They must be as simple as possible, but of course that's a huge challenge. We aim to minimize administrative tasks. That's also a very high challenge, but we do that in order to better serve you. We learn from our experience, and we adapt to ever-changing landscape of the research. We also contribute to that landscape research, but you are, of course, the people who make the landscape of research in Switzerland. And then Switzerland should offer an excellent research environment. That's already what I mentioned before. If we look now at something that is very important, you mentioned some of the money that flows from the Swiss National Science Foundation to the University of Zurich. If we look here at the sources of the financing of research and development in Switzerland, you can see that, of course, more than half goes through the private enterprises. The Confederation and the cantons, the government, also have a huge part here. And if we look, and then you have abroad and the higher education institutions here, and it goes to private non-profit organizations. But what we can see here is that for the Swiss National Science Foundation, that represents 4% of this pie. And those 4% are almost close to $1 billion per year. So here you have I think it's 2015, but 2016, those 4% represent 1 billion. And those 1 billion, and that's what I mentioned earlier, those billion are basically funds that are allocated in a competitive way. And this competitive way that is something very specific in this pie chart. If we had made a new pie chart with competitiveness or competitive fund allocation, then definitely this 4% would be much higher. And this competitive way of funding allocation, that of course has set up a standard here for the entire science system, and that's very important. So it means that the people who benefit actually from this billion, not only they contribute at the Swiss level, but they also contribute at the international level, because you are competitive also at the international level. If we look closer now at how we actually spend differently the money, we have to look at the different funding opportunities, and then you can see that you actually can submit application to a wide range of schemes, and the major one here, you have some rectangles, and they represent 40% of this total bigger rectangle here, and that's 40% of the billion I mentioned earlier. So 40%, 46%, close to 50%, that's our aim, are actually dedicated to project funding, that is basic research project, use, inspire, basic project research, but that we can discuss eventually later, that's just a part of it. And then we have the programs and the careers, and those here are all the schemes we can provide for the careers. That's 22%. We have the program. Those are all the schemes that are already orientated in some way by the government. And then we also have infrastructure. That's about 9%. And we should not forget science communication. It's very small here, but I think this part is very important and might be bigger. And you can contribute to that. So I think those schemes we have here should be a bit more used, and you can promote much better research and science, I think, in Switzerland and abroad. And those days where we do have some struggling in all the main campaigns that are produced by the governments and the discussion we have in the society, I think that researchers could certainly provide more communication. So this is quite important, but that's a personal point of view. If we look at one of the specific schemes I mentioned before, that we have the project funding, and not only we are actually providing for basic research, we also are looking at what's happening on the neighborhood. And on the neighborhood, what we do have is, of course, this technology development and the product development. And basically here you have a curve of the resource distribution along this path going from fundamental or basic research down to or up to product development. This is the value chain, and you can see here that the Swiss National Foundation contribute this way. Here you have, here it's written CTI, but nowadays you can better talk about Suisse. And if we look at one of the schemes we introduced together with Suisse, is this scheme called Bridge, and the idea is to reduce this depth of valley, that was the way it was called in the past, and the idea of this scheme is to kind of reduce this gap between those two curves. So quite exciting, and hopefully that will be pursued and successfully. If we look now at the distribution of our funding portfolio, basically you find again the programs here. You have Synergia, that's also part of the program. You have the projects, you have the infrastructure, and if you group all those blue together, you have the careers, and then you find again science communication. So if you look at this axis, that's the academic age, going from the PhD, but don't forget that PhD or 3 years of research experience, that's equivalent to the PhD. Then here you have the years of the academic age, and basically you can see that all our portfolio covers the life of a researcher. So let me go a bit further now and move on to the organization of the Swiss National Science Foundation, and looking specifically at one body, and this is the National Research Council, and this is the scientific body of the Swiss National Science Foundation. It is this body who actually evaluates all the research proposals you submitted, and it's the body which makes and takes funding decisions. And in order to evaluate and make decisions on all your proposal, it's divided into division and specialized committee. So here you have division 1 that covers humanities and social sciences. You have mathematics, natural and engineering sciences for division 2, biology and medicine division 3, and division 4 national programs. And if you look at those special committee interdisciplinary research, they are actually they go through all the division and all the discipline. You have the specialist committee, international cooperation, and the specialist committee for the careers. But all that will be explained a bit later in all the different presentations. Well, that being said, I would like to mention to you, before handing the mic to the next speaker, I would like to mention some of the challenges we're facing and we're dealing with. The first one is, of course, to set up standard of scientific quality or scientific excellence, and we're working on that. We try to develop and, of course, always adapt and have better evaluation procedures, and that's go through the implementation of DORA. This is the Declaration on Research Assessment that was signed in San Francisco. And we explore alternative evaluation mechanisms. We're open up to going to the lottery. Maybe. We optimize evaluation of use-inspired projects, but I will not talk about those different alternatives. I would like more to talk about one main challenge, and that is very important to us, is open science. And under open science, that is like a hat that covers different activities, and I will briefly mention something about open access, which is about the publications, and open research data. So what are the main decisions that we took in March this year? What we want is by 2020, we will have all publications out of the Swiss National Funded project that will be open access, so they will be available. And that will be by 2020. And that fits into the goal with the line of open strategy of the European Union. They try and hope to achieve that goal also 2020. And we have also a goal more ambitious than the Swiss National Open Access Strategy, which aim that same goal, but for 2024. So we are actually going a bit ahead, and that's very good, and hopefully we will reach that by 2020, and that's a huge step into open science. So for the moment, that's how it is now, but that will be changed, and there will be a communication about that earlier next year. So, but for the moment, I will just explain to you as it is now. So the idea is that for the articles, you can get up to 3,000 francs per article in order to get them published directly on an open access way. And then for the books, it's also a contribution we make. We co-finance, depending if it's a thesis, if it's basically numerical book, or if it's an enhanced book that is worked for a specific publication, and of course that will require a higher contribution. So that's up to 22,000 francs, otherwise it's 18,000 or 12,000, 8,000 for a PhD thesis. But the idea is to get more and more, and in the end, all the publications that will be freely accessed and directly accessed. No embargo. Open research data, that was so much for the open access. Now if we look at the open research data, what we want, and what that was been also established since October 2017, what we would like to have in each of your proposal that you submit is a data management plan. And this data management plan is a formal requirement for the project submission, but it describes what you will be doing with the data. So it's something you can update during the time you get the grant, and it's supposed to give us the growth lines of what you're going to be doing with the data. It's not something that is established exactly and you cannot touch anymore. So, but we need to have this so we can know exactly what you plan to do and how you will do it. Data sharing, the published data have to be shared on the public repositories, and here you have a list of public repositories where you can actually deposit your data, and that, of course, should be mentioned then in the data management plan. Of course, it might be that some of the data cannot be published because for confidentiality or security or whatsoever, and that could be mentioned and specified, of course. So everything has been taken into account. So for the data management plan, like I mentioned before, they are needed at the moment of the submission, but they are not part of the review process. So it's an information and indication of what you will be doing with the data. So basically, we are just looking at the plausible data management plan. And then it must be, I mentioned already that it's editable, you can revise it, update it, and once the SNF founded has ended, at the final scientific report has been approved, the data management plan is shared on P3, so it means it's accessible to everyone. Then, like I mentioned before, in case of ethical confidentiality or for legal reason, technical reason, of course, there might be some exceptions. Data sharing, what we do expect from the data that actually you're handling. So they will expect they are going to be published and shared, and in order to do that, of course, as soon as possible, they need to be put up onto repositories, and those repositories should be fair, or they should be in order so that the data sets are findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. So those repositories do exist. Some of them do exist. I mentioned the list before. So the idea is to put your data as soon as possible on those fair repositories. Additional data can, of course, be shared, up to you. And the Swiss National Science Foundation contributes with a 10,000 per grant in order that you can prepare the data and the effort and services that are needed to put the data on the repositories. So basically, those were the two main challenges I wanted to introduce you. But of course, do not forget that even though you have to do or you should do this, it's in order to improve the entire research system in Switzerland and abroad. Don't forget that's your main work. It's come up with some research and not just administrative part, of course.